There is a book that has been rejected by the first publisher who saw it, that sold so few copies in its initial print run that the publisher abandoned it, that was then picked up by another publisher and became the best-selling Brazilian novel in history, that went on to be translated into more than 80 languages, that has sold over 65 million copies worldwide, making it one of the best-selling books ever written in any language, and that has been cited by people as varied as Will Smith, Madonna, Bill Clinton, and countless ordinary readers across every culture on Earth as the book that changed how they understood their own life. That book is The Alchemist. Its author is Paulo Coelho, and its story before it was a story is almost as strange as the one it contains. Paulo Coelho was born in Rio de Janeiro in 1947. He was a difficult, dreaming child in a family that didn't quite know what to do with him, and his parents eventually had him committed to a psychiatric institution 3 separate times, not because he was genuinely mentally ill, but because he refused to give up his dream of becoming a writer, and his family considered this refusal a form of madness. He escaped the institution each time, though the experience left marks on him that appear transformed in his later writing. He spent his 20s in a way that sounds more like a novel than a life. He traveled extensively, was briefly involved in radical politics, was arrested and tortured by the Brazilian military government, worked as a songwriter and lyricist, and made a pilgrimage along the road of Santiago de Compostela in Spain, an experience that produced his first significant book, and that fundamentally changed his relationship with faith, meaning, and what he called personal legend. The Alchemist was written in 1987 in a period of 2 weeks. Coelho has described it as a book that was already written inside him, and that the 2 weeks of writing was simply the time required to let it out. It was published in a small Brazilian edition, barely noticed, and nearly vanished. Then it found readers, a few at a time, through word of mouth, through the hands of people who had read it and felt compelled to give it to someone they loved. And it grew, slowly and then with gathering speed, until it was everywhere, still growing, still being pressed into people's hands by people who said you must read this. In this video, I want to do what I tried to do with The Little Prince. Take this book seriously as the particular, specific, deeply personal thing it is, rather than either reducing it to a set of motivational bullet points or dismissing it with the skepticism that its enormous popularity sometimes invites. We'll walk through the story, the ideas, the life that produced them, what makes this book so resistant to paraphrase, what its actual argument is and why it matters, what it asks of the reader, and what reading it carefully, with the full intelligence you bring to things that deserve it, can teach you about the relationship between the life you're living and the life you might live. Stick with me. Let's begin with the story, because unlike many of the books we've covered in this series, The Alchemist is primarily a story, and its ideas live inside the story rather than alongside it. Paraphrasing the ideas out of the story is like trying to describe a painting by listing its colors. You get the information but lose the thing. Santiago is a young Andalusian shepherd who has a recurring dream. In the dream, a child takes him to the Egyptian pyramids and tells him that he will find a treasure there. He consults an old woman who interprets dreams, and she tells him the dream is prophetic and that he must go to Egypt. He then meets an old king named Melchizedek, the king of Salem, who tells him about the concept of a personal legend. The thing you most want to accomplish in your life, the thing the universe conspires to help you achieve if you pursue it honestly. Santiago sells his sheep and crosses the Strait of Gibraltar to Africa. In Tangiers, he is robbed of everything, left with nothing in a strange country where he doesn't speak the language. He works for a crystal merchant for nearly 2 years, earns back enough money to continue his journey, and then joins a caravan crossing the Sahara toward Egypt. In the desert, he falls in love with a woman named Fatima who lives at an oasis. He wants to stay. She tells him to go because a man who abandons his personal legend for a woman is not the kind of man she wants. He meets the alchemist, a mysterious, ancient figure who becomes his guide through the final part of the journey. The alchemist teaches him the language of the world, the soul of the world, the concept of the masterwork, and the idea that all of creation participates in the unfolding of every individual's personal legend. Santiago reaches the pyramids. He begins to dig. He is beaten by thieves who find him there, and one of the thieves tells him, laughing, that he himself once had a dream about treasure buried in Spain, in a ruined church with a sycamore tree, but he wasn't foolish enough to cross the sea chasing a dream. Santiago recognizes the place the thief describes. It is exactly where he began, the church where he slept as a shepherd. He returns to Spain, digs beneath the sycamore tree, and finds his treasure there, exactly where his journey had started. This ending is the key to understanding the book's argument, and it's also the source of most of the confusion about what the book is actually saying, because it sounds, on the surface, like a circular joke. The treasure was at home the whole time, you didn't need to go anywhere. But the book's argument is precisely the opposite. You needed to go exactly where you went, and do exactly what you did, to become the person capable of finding the treasure that was always there. Santiago returns not as the shepherd who had a dream, but as someone who has learned the language of the world, who has encountered the soul of the world, who has survived loss and robbery and the temptation to stay in the desert with the woman he loves, who has stood before the pyramids and been beaten by thieves, who has been changed at every level of his being by the journey. The treasure was always in Spain. But Spain, at the beginning, was not ready to reveal it, because Santiago was not yet the person who could see it. The journey was not a mistake. The journey was the point. What you become through the pursuit of your personal legend is inseparable from the personal legend itself. Now let's get into the book's major ideas, because The Alchemist is unusually rich in explicit philosophical content for a work of literary fiction, and Coelho makes most of his arguments directly rather than hiding them entirely in the narrative. The first and most central idea is the personal legend. Every person, the book argues, has a personal legend, a specific purpose, a particular thing they were placed on earth to accomplish or to become, that is uniquely theirs and that the entire universe conspires to help them fulfill if they pursue it. This isn't meant as a metaphor. In the book's world, it is a literal cosmological principle. The soul of the world is the force that animates all of creation, and the personal legend of each individual is part of the larger pattern of that force unfolding itself through history. The word legend in personal legend is worth pausing on, because it's easy to read it as meaning something like destiny or fate, and Coelho means something more active than either of those words suggests. A legend is a story. Your personal legend is the story of your life as it could be if you followed your deepest calling. It is not fixed. It is not something that will happen to you automatically. It is something you must choose, repeatedly and at cost, in the face of everything that would have you choose otherwise. The book is explicit about what gets in the way of personal legends, and it's not primarily bad luck or hostile circumstances. It is, first, the weight of what other people expect of you. It is the accumulated pressure of family and culture and social convention that tells you who you are supposed to be and what you are supposed to want, and that treats your actual deepest desire as either frivolous or impractical or dangerous. Santiago's family expected him to become a priest. He became a shepherd instead, which was itself a compromise, a step toward the freedom he wanted but not yet the full expression of it. Second, what gets in the way is fear. Not the acute fear of specific dangers, but the chronic, low-level fear of what might happen if you commit fully to something that might not work out. The book names this directly. Fear of failure is the great enemy of personal legends, not because failure is impossible, but because the fear of failure is often more paralyzing than failure itself. And because the life spent avoiding the risk of failure is, in the book's framework, a failure of a more fundamental kind. Third, what gets in the way is what the book calls the comfort of the known, the settled life, the familiar routine, the accumulated arrangements that make abandoning the journey feel irresponsible. Santiago's sheep are this for him. He loves them. They're familiar. They ask nothing of him except what he already knows how to give. The shepherd's life is comfortable and comprehensible, and giving it up for an unknown journey toward a dream that might be wrong is genuinely difficult, not because he doesn't want to go, but because what he would be leaving is real and good and his. The book's argument about this is not that you should be reckless or that comfort is always wrong. It's that the particular comfort that keeps you from your personal legend is a form of betrayal of something you were given, not by convention or obligation, but by the deepest part of yourself. The second major idea is omens. Throughout Santiago's journey, the world sends him signs. A hawk's shadow, the flight of two hawks that the alchemist teaches him to read, a piece of gold, a chance conversation, a book that falls open to the right page. The book treats these not as coincidences, but as the universe's method of communication with those who are paying the right kind of attention. This is the most explicitly spiritual dimension of the book, and also the one that makes its most skeptical readers most uncomfortable. It is worth being honest about what the book is actually claiming here, rather than either dismissing it or swallowing it whole. What the book claims is not that the universe magically arranges events to help you. What it claims is that a person who is genuinely, honestly, alertly pursuing their personal legend begins to notice things in the world around them that they would not notice otherwise, because the pursuit has changed their relationship with attention. They are no longer moving through the world on autopilot, processing only the information that their existing categories deem relevant. They are open, searching, genuinely curious about what the moment contains. And in that state of open, searching attention, the world does indeed seem to offer more relevant information, more apparent guidance, more seeming confirmation that the direction they're moving is the right one. Whether this is literally the universe speaking, or the natural consequence of paying better attention, is a question the book deliberately leaves open. Coelho's own spiritual tradition, which draws on Catholicism, alchemy, and various mystical sources, inclines toward the literal reading. A reader without this tradition can find the same practical content in the attentional reading. Either way, the effect of treating certain unexpected events as potentially meaningful, rather than dismissing them immediately as noise, is to engage more fully with the present moment, which the book suggests is itself part of what the pursuit of a personal legend requires. The third major idea is the language of the world, which the alchemist teaches Santiago to understand, and which is one of the book's most beautiful concepts. The language of the world is the communication that happens between all things when they are genuinely present to each other. The way a shepherd comes to know his sheep by reading their smallest movements. The way a wind reader knows the desert by its smell and its color, and the pattern of its dunes. The way Santiago eventually learns to listen to his own heart, and to trust what it tells him even when it contradicts what his reason would say. The language of the world is not words. It is attention so refined and so patient and so genuinely curious that it begins to be received by things that don't use words to communicate. It is the intelligence of genuine engagement rather than the intelligence of classification and analysis. And it is, in the book's framework, the mode of understanding most native to the pursuit of personal legends. The fourth major idea is the soul of the world, the force that animates everything, that connects the shepherd's understanding of his sheep to the alchemist's understanding of metals, to the scientist's understanding of particles, to the mystic's understanding of God. All of these, the book suggests, are different modes of perceiving the same underlying reality, that the world is not a collection of unrelated objects, but a single living entity in constant communication with itself, and that every individual personal legend is part of the pattern of this entity unfolding. This is an explicitly pantheistic or panentheistic view of the universe, one that has ancient roots in multiple spiritual traditions including Sufism, Hermeticism, and various indigenous cosmologies, and that Seelho presents not as a theological argument, but as the experiential reality of the book's world. Whether or not you accept it as literally true, the vision of the world it describes, as something genuinely alive and genuinely responsive and genuinely interested in your becoming what you were placed here to become, has an emotional and motivational power that more deflationary visions of the cosmos often don't. Fifth major idea is the alchemical concept of the masterwork, which in the history of alchemy referred to the transmutation of base metals into gold. In the book's expanded use of the concept, the masterwork is the transformation of the self through the pursuit of the personal legend, the way that Santiago is transformed by his journey in ways that go far beyond the treasure he finds at its end. The gold is real, but the greater transformation is what he has become by the time he finds it. This metaphor connects to a very old idea in mystical and philosophical traditions, that the real purpose of any quest is not the object at its end, but the transformation undergone in pursuing it. The warrior who seeks the Holy Grail returns in the stories, not primarily richer but wiser, wounded, more fully himself. The seeker who crosses the desert returns not primarily with knowledge, but with a capacity for understanding that the comfortable, unquestioned life could never have produced. The journey is the transformation. The treasure is what you find when you have become the person the journey was designed to make you. The sixth idea, which is stated near the end of the book in the alchemist's final teaching, is perhaps the most difficult and most important. When you want something, all the universe conspires to help you achieve it. This sentence has been widely quoted, sometimes to the point of becoming a CLICH Chinese letter, and it is worth being specific about what the book means by it, because the CLICH Chinese letter version is considerably simpler than the actual claim. The book does not claim that wanting something is sufficient for obtaining it, or that the universe will deliver your desires without cost or effort or difficulty on your part. What it claims is something more subtle and more demanding, that genuine desire, not preference or wish or vague aspiration, but the kind of deep, honest, committed desire that you are willing to organize your life around, acts as a kind of signal that puts you in a particular relationship with the world, in which relevant opportunities, resources, and alignments that would otherwise be invisible to you begin to become visible. Not because the universe has changed. Because you have changed, and because the change in you changes what you are able to see. This is, again, compatible with both a literal metaphysical reading and a purely psychological reading, and Seelho seems to intend both simultaneously. The practical content is this: people who genuinely commit to something, who restructure their attention and their actions and their choices around it, do tend to find that the world reveals more relevant paths than it did before, not because the world is different but because they are. Now let's talk about what makes this book so hard to paraphrase, and why so many attempts to summarize it produce something that doesn't quite capture what the book actually does to you when you read it. The Alchemist is written in a mode that literary critics sometimes call fable or parable, and that sits in a space that has no perfect modern genre name. It has the simplicity of a children's story in its sentence structure and its narrative directness, and it has the complexity of an adult philosophical text in what those simple sentences are actually saying. This combination is extremely rare, and when it works, which it does here, it produces something that can be read at 15 and still mean something new at 40, not because the book has changed, but because you have. The book's language is deliberately flat and clear, without the kind of descriptive flourishing or stylistic self-consciousness that literary fiction typically uses to signal that it is serious. This flatness is sometimes cited by critics as a weakness, and it is fair to say that The Alchemist is not a book that rewards the kind of reading that prizes linguistic sophistication above all else. But the flatness is also a form of respect. The book trusts its ideas enough not to dress them up, and it trusts its reader enough to assume that the ideas themselves are sufficient to produce whatever effect the book is going for. What the book is going for, I think, is not primarily comprehension. You can understand every sentence in The Alchemist on a first reading, and you probably will. What it is going for is a particular kind of resonance, the sensation of reading something that you had already half known but had never quite heard articulated before. This is why so many people describe reading The Alchemist not as learning something new, but as remembering something they had forgotten. Not because Seelho is presenting ideas they've already encountered, but because the ideas speak to something in the reader that existed before the book, and that the book simply makes audible. This experience of resonance is what makes the book so difficult to argue with, and so difficult to argue for. If it resonates with you, the resonance is self-validating in a way that doesn't require external support. If it doesn't, no argument will produce the resonance from the outside. Let's now address the fair criticisms of this book, because they exist and they deserve honest acknowledgement. The first criticism is that the book's central premise, that each person has a specific personal legend that the universe is conspiring to help them achieve, is not obviously true and may be actively harmful in some contexts. The book is written as if this is a universal law, but it is a philosophical and spiritual claim, not an empirical one, and it has implications that don't work equally well for every reader in every situation. For someone who has the freedom, the resources, and the relative security to pursue a dream, the personal legend framework can be genuinely liberating. It gives permission to take seriously a desire that convention or practicality has been pressuring them to suppress. But for someone whose life is shaped by constraints they did not choose, the framework can be misleading in ways that are not entirely the reader's fault. The book does not spend much time on the difference between someone who abandons their sheep to cross the desert by choice and someone who was never given sheep in the first place. The world it describes is one in which the primary obstacles to personal legends are internal rather than structural, which is sometimes accurate and sometimes not, and the book doesn't make much effort to distinguish between these cases. The second criticism is that the book's treatment of female characters is thin. Fatima, the woman Santiago loves, is primarily a device. She exists in the narrative to demonstrate that love can be a form of settling rather than completion when it replaces, rather than enriches the pursuit of a personal legend. She has essentially no inner life that the book reveals, no personal legend of her own that the narrative considers. The book's world is one in which men have personal legends to pursue and women wait at oases for men pursuing theirs. And this is a limitation worth nomming rather than ignoring. The third criticism is one of intellectual rigor. The Alchemist presents spiritual ideas with the confidence of revealed truth rather than the humility of genuine inquiry, and it synthesizes concepts from multiple traditions: Hermeticism, alchemy, Sufism, Christianity, in a way that is not always faithful to any of them. Readers who are deeply familiar with any of these traditions sometimes find the book's use of their concepts reductive or distorted. This is a legitimate concern. though it's also worth noting that the book is not claiming to be a scholarly treatment of any tradition, and that synthesis and transformation of source material is a long-established literary practice. The fourth criticism is more personal. The book's vision of a universe that conspires to help you achieve your dreams is simply not the universe that many people recognize from their experience. People pursue their deepest desires and fail, not because they lacked commitment or read the omens incorrectly, but because the world is genuinely difficult and outcomes are not guaranteed by the quality of your intention. The book's optimism about this is beautiful and motivating when you are in a position to be motivated by it, and it can feel cruelly out of touch when you are in a position where its vision doesn't match your experience. These are real criticisms. Holding them alongside the book's genuine power doesn't diminish either. It makes both more honest. What remains genuinely valuable after holding these criticisms honestly is significant. The concept of the personal legend, even taken non-literally, even held with appropriate skepticism about its claims of cosmic support, is a useful tool for a specific and important kind of self-examination. Most people, at most points in their lives, have not clearly asked themselves, what is the thing I most genuinely want to accomplish? Not what I think I should want, not what would be practical, not what would impress the people around me, but the thing that, when I'm honest with myself in a quiet moment, feels like what I was actually placed here to do. This question, which the personal legend concept forces you to ask, is more valuable than the metaphysical framework the book wraps around it. And most people who have read The Alchemist report that it was the first time they had asked this question seriously, which in itself is worth the price of admission. The book's treatment of obstacles as necessary rather than unfortunate is also genuinely valuable and genuinely underemphasized in most success narratives. Santiago's robbery in Tangiers, his 2 years of work for the crystal merchant, his time in the desert when he almost turned back, none of these are setbacks that represent the universe failing to conspire in his favor. They are each, in the book's framework, necessary parts of the process, the tests that the personal legend requires before revealing itself, the experiences that produce the capacity for the next stage of the journey. This reframing of difficulty as necessary rather than aberrant is one of the most psychologically useful moves the book makes, and it doesn't require accepting the full metaphysical apparatus to find it valuable. The book's insistence on the importance of the present moment is also worth highlighting, because it is stated less explicitly than the personal legend concept, but is actually more central to the story's emotional content. Santiago's most important realizations all happen in the moment of full presence to what is in front of him, not in moments of planning or strategizing or reviewing the plan. The language of the world is accessible only when you are fully here. The soul of the world reveals itself only when you stop thinking about what comes next long enough to be genuinely where you are. This is not an original idea. It is a very old idea with a long history in contemplative traditions, but the book makes it viscerally present rather than abstractly stated, which is the more useful form. Let's now talk about the book's relationship to Paulo Coelho's own life, because unlike many authors who maintain a polite fiction of separation between themselves and their work, Coelho has consistently and explicitly described The Alchemist as autobiographical in its deepest concerns. The psychiatric institution, the radical politics, the arrest, the pilgrimage, these are all real. But perhaps the most relevant biographical fact for understanding The Alchemist is Coelho's own long delay in pursuing the writing he knew from childhood that he was meant to do. He wanted to be a writer from early childhood. He was told this was impractical, then mad, then irresponsible. He spent his 20s doing things that were not writing, some of them interesting and some of them genuinely dangerous, and some of them simply filling time while the actual thing waited. He began writing seriously in his 30s. The Alchemist was published when he was 40. The book is, among other things, an account of what it cost him to finally pursue his personal legend, and what it gave him when he did. The sheep were real, in the sense that all the arrangements of a life not quite fully lived are real. Comfortable, familiar, comprehensible, and ultimately not enough. The treasure was real too, in the sense that the thing you were placed here to do, once you finally do it, turns out to have been available all along, requiring only the willingness to begin. The Road of Santiago de Compostela, which Coelho walked in 1986, appears in the book in transformed form as the journey across the desert. The pilgrimage changed him, as genuine pilgrimages tend to do, not by delivering enlightenment at the end, but by changing him, through the daily discipline of walking and the encountering of his own limits, and the experience of being genuinely alone with his own inner landscape, into the person who was finally capable of writing the book that was already inside him. He wrote The Alchemist in 2 weeks after returning from the pilgrimage. He said later that he wrote it in 2 weeks because it had been accumulating for his entire life up to that point. The pilgrimage was not the cause of the book. It was the final preparation that allowed what was already present to finally emerge. This is itself a model for what the book is describing. The personal legend doesn't appear fully formed when you finally give yourself permission to pursue it. It reveals itself gradually, in stages, through the process of pursuing it, and the moment of apparent sudden clarity, the 2 weeks of writing, is always preceded by the much longer, less visible preparation that makes the clarity possible. Let me now talk about the book's relationship to alchemy as a metaphor, because this is rich territory that the book uses more deeply than it might initially appear. Alchemy was the medieval and early modern science and art of transmutation, the attempt to transform base metals into gold, and in its more esoteric dimensions, to transform the human soul from its base, undeveloped state into something more refined, more luminous, more genuinely itself. The philosopher's stone, which appears in the book, was the legendary substance capable of achieving this transmutation, both of metals and of souls. In Coelho's use of this metaphor, the philosopher's stone is not a literal object but a capacity. The capacity to see the world in such a way that its gold, its essential truth and beauty and meaning, is visible rather than hidden. The alchemist in the book has this capacity. He can turn metal into gold not through chemical transformation, but through his understanding of the soul of the world, his ability to see the gold that is already present in everything rather than manufacturing it from something lesser. And Santiago's journey is, in the book's framework, his alchemical process. The gradual transmutation of a shepherd who had a dream into a person who has learned the language of the world, who has encountered the soul of the world, who has loved and left and returned, who has been beaten and robbed and has stood before the pyramids, and who returns to Spain not richer in a simple sense but genuinely more himself, more capable of seeing, more fully what he was placed here to be. The gold at the end of the book is not a metaphor for anything. It's actual gold, but the treasure that Santiago actually found on the journey was not the gold. It was what the journey made of him. Let's spend some time on Fatima, because she deserves more attention than summaries of this book typically give her, and because what the book does with her is more interesting than it first appears. Fatima is described as a woman of the desert, a woman who understands the desert's ways and accepts them. When Santiago falls in love with her and wants to abandon his journey to stay with her, she tells him to go. And her reason is not selflessness in a conventional sense. It is something more precise and more demanding. She knows that a man who abandons his personal legend for love, even genuine love, becomes lesser, and that the lesser version of him is not who she wants. This is a challenging position to hold, and Seelho presents it without apology. The book's view of love is that genuine love does not diminish the beloved's becoming. It participates in it. Fatima's love for Santiago includes her refusal to be the reason he stops becoming what he was placed here to be, because she understands that a Santiago who has stopped becoming is not the Santiago she loves. This idea can be heard as a rationalization for putting ambition above relationships, and it has been criticized on those grounds. But I think the book is making a more specific and more honest claim, that when love becomes the reason you stop listening to the deepest part of yourself, it has shifted from something that honors you to something that diminishes you, and that genuine love, the kind that actually serves both people, does not want to be the cause of that diminishment. The limitation of the book's treatment of this idea is that it only shows us Fatima's willingness to wait, not her own personal legend, not her own journey, not what she is becoming in the time that Santiago is away. She waits at the oasis, and he goes to find treasure and returns. The book doesn't tell us what she was doing while he was gone. This is a real gap, and acknowledging it doesn't require pretending the book's insight about love and personal legend is wrong, only that it is seen through a single, limited point of view. Before we move toward the final section, I want to address something that comes up frequently in conversations about The Alchemist: the question of whether this is ultimately a religious book, and what to do with it if you don't share Seelho's spiritual framework. The book is explicitly and unapologetically spiritual. It presents a world in which God exists, in which the soul of the world is a real force, in which personal legends are cosmologically significant, and in which prayer, omens, and mystical experience are part of the normal equipment of a life well lived. Seelho has described his own spiritual life as central to everything he writes, and The Alchemist bears the marks of that centrality on every page. This creates a genuine challenge for readers who don't share these premises. Not an insurmountable one, because most of the book's ideas have non-theological translations that carry much of the practical content. But the specific quality of the experience of reading the book, the particular emotional resonance that so many readers describe, seems to be connected at least partly to its spiritual dimension, to the sense that the universe described in the book is one that cares about you and is interested in your becoming. If you can hold the book's spiritual framework as a useful fiction, a way of telling a kind of truth about the relationship between individual purpose and the world at large, even without endorsing its literal claims, you can receive most of what it has to offer. If you find that framework actively alienating, the book will be a harder read, not because the non-spiritual content isn't there, but because the spiritual content is so thoroughly interwoven with the rest that separating them cleanly is genuinely difficult. The book deserves to be read in the fullest sense of that word, with both the intelligence that questions its claims and the openness that allows its vision to be genuinely experienced before being evaluated. Most books that have sold 65 million copies have sold them because something in them connects with something in the reader that more cautious, more epistemically rigorous books sometimes miss. Taking that connection seriously, trying to understand what it is and where it comes from, is more interesting and more useful than dismissing it. Let's move toward the final section, because I want to spend some time on what this book is actually asking of the reader, and what taking that request seriously would mean in practice. The book asks you to take your deepest desire seriously enough to let it change the decisions you make. Not necessarily to sell your sheep and cross the desert, which is not most people's actual situation, but to ask, honestly, what your personal legend might be if you are willing to believe that such a thing exists, and to notice what gets in the way of pursuing it. The book asks you to pay attention to what the world might be showing you that you've been filing under coincidence, not to believe uncritically that every chance event is a cosmic signal, but to hold open the possibility that the world you move through is richer in available meaning than your habitual categories allow for, and that the kind of attention that looks for meaning might find more of it than the kind of attention that doesn't. The book asks you to be honest about the difference between the settled comfort of the life you're living and the sometimes uncomfortable pull of the life you might be avoiding. It asks you to notice where you have stopped in your journey and made a comfortable camp that you've been calling a destination. And it asks whether the comfort of the camp is worth what you might find if you kept walking. The book asks you to understand that obstacles are part of the journey rather than interruptions of it, that the robbery in Tangiers, in whatever form your Tangiers takes, is not evidence that you were wrong to start, but evidence that you are genuinely underway. And perhaps most fundamentally, the book asks you to consider the possibility that the treasure you are looking for might be somewhere behind you, in something you passed on your way to somewhere else, something you can only find now, at the end of a journey you haven't finished yet, because you weren't yet the person who could see it. Let's do a full account of the book's major themes before we close. First, the personal legend, the specific purpose of each individual life, which the world conspires to help you achieve if you pursue it honestly and completely. Second, the obstacle as teacher. Every difficulty on the path of the personal legend is a necessary part of the preparation for what comes next, not an interruption or a mistake, but a transformation. Third, omens and the language of the world. The way that genuine, alert, curious attention reveals meaning in the world that habitual, automatic attention misses. Fourth, love as participation in becoming. The idea that genuine love honors the beloved's personal legend rather than replacing it, and that love which stops your becoming is not yet the fullest form of itself. Fifth, the soul of the world. The underlying unity of all existence, the force that animates everything and in which every personal legend participates. Sixth, the masterwork, the transmutation of the self through the pursuit of the personal legend, the becoming that is inseparable from the achievement. And seventh, the treasure already present, the paradox that the thing you are journeying toward can only be found by someone who has made the journey, and that it was always there, waiting for the person you were becoming. Before you go, I want to suggest something specific that the book might ask of you in terms of an actual action, not a thought experiment, not a visualization, but something to do. Find a piece of paper and write down the honest answer to this question. What is the thing you most want to do with your life that you have been putting off because the time isn't right, or because you're not ready, or because someone told you it was impractical, or because you're afraid it might not work? Write it down, not the reasonable version, not the scaled-back version that might get you social approval, the thing itself. And then write down the smallest, most immediately available step toward it that you could take in the next 48 hours. Not the whole journey, just the next step. The first step, taken imperfectly and with incomplete knowledge of what comes after, is what separates the people who someday follow their personal legends from the people who spend their lives thinking about it. Santiago sold his sheep. That was the step. Everything else followed from that one step. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture a version of you, years from now, who made the small, slightly frightening, completely available decision in the next 2 days to take one step toward the thing they most wanted. Who didn't wait to feel ready, who didn't wait for better circumstances, who just took the step, and then the next one, and then the next. Picture what that version of you found at the end of a journey they didn't know they were beginning when they took that first step. The universe, as the book says, conspires to help you, but first you have to begin. Thanks for watching all the way through. Your personal legend is waiting. It always has been. Let's go deeper into a dimension of the book that most breakdowns overlook entirely. The specific, carefully crafted role of each character Santiago encounters on his journey, and what each one teaches him about different relationships to personal legends. The crystal merchant is perhaps the most poignant figure in the entire book, and the one who best illustrates what happens when a personal legend is acknowledged but not pursued. He is a devout Muslim who has always dreamed of making a pilgrimage to Mecca. He has run his crystal shop for 30 years. He has had, for all those years, enough money to make the pilgrimage. He has simply never gone. When Santiago asks him about this, he gives an answer of extraordinary honesty. If he goes to Mecca, what will he have left to dream about? This answer is not cowardice, though it might look like it from the outside. It is a specific and recognizable form of relationship to a dream, keeping the dream intact as a future possibility, which gives every present day a quality of potential that might dissolve if the dream were actually tested against reality. The merchant is not lazy or afraid in a simple way. He is in love with his longing in a way that leaving for Mecca might terminate. And he has made, without quite nomming it, the choice to preserve the dream rather than pursue it. The book judges this gently. The merchant's life is not presented as a failure in any obvious sense. He is kind, he is honest, he runs his shop well, he provides employment and good service. But there is something in him, some quality of full aliveness, that has been held in reserve for 30 years waiting for a journey that will never begin. And Santiago, who has actually begun his journey by the time he meets the merchant, recognizes this, and it makes him both sad and more certain that his own decision to sell his sheep was the right one. The contrast between the merchant and Santiago is not between a coward and a brave man. It is between a man who tends his longing and a man who spends it, who converts the potential energy of a dream into the actual, sometimes painful, sometimes wonderful kinetic energy of a life being lived in the direction of its deepest desire. The Englishman is another figure worth examining closely. He is a student of alchemy, learned in the books and the theories, who has traveled with the caravan to find the alchemist so that the alchemist can teach him the secrets of the philosopher's stone. He has read every book on the subject. He knows the theory in extraordinary detail. He is, by the measures the Academy would use, an expert. And yet the alchemist is initially not very interested in him. He tells the Englishman to observe the desert and the caravan rather than reading his books. The Englishman tries this and finds it difficult and unproductive, and soon returns to his books. The alchemist's response is not condemnation but recognition. The Englishman will need to continue his own path before he can reach what he is looking for. He is not wrong to pursue knowledge. He is simply not yet ready to let knowledge become wisdom, which requires a different kind of learning than books can deliver. The contrast between the Englishman and Santiago is the contrast between knowing about something and knowing it. Santiago can't read alchemical texts, but he has learned the language of the world through his relationship with his sheep, and the language of the world is what the philosopher's stone actually requires. The Englishman has the theory. Santiago, without knowing it, is already in the practice. This contrast speaks directly to something the book is consistently saying about the relationship between intellectual knowledge and the kind of understanding that comes from genuine engagement with life. Neither the Englishman nor Santiago is fully wrong, but only one of them at this stage of his development can follow the alchemist. The alchemist himself is the most complex figure in the book, and the one who appears latest in the story, which is appropriate because he represents a level of understanding that Santiago can only reach after everything that came before. He is described as ancient, as having learned what he knows through an extremely long life of practice and transformation, as being in genuine communion with the soul of the world at a level that makes most questions unnecessary. What the alchemist teaches Santiago is not, primarily, alchemical secrets. What he teaches him is how to listen to his own heart, which is something Santiago has been doing imperfectly throughout the book, and which the alchemist helps him do with more precision and more trust. Your heart knows things your mind does not yet know, the alchemist tells Santiago. And then he tells him the greatest danger. Not that the heart is wrong, but that the heart will be discouraged by the difficulties and will try to convince you to turn back, framing its fear as wisdom. This is one of the most valuable specific things the book says about the relationship between the heart and the pursuit of a personal legend. The heart is not always an ally. It is also afraid of loss, afraid of failure, afraid of the gap between what you are and what the journey requires you to become. It will sometimes, in the language of very convincing rationalization, tell you that this is too hard, that you have given enough, that you should stop here and be satisfied with where you are. The alchemist's counsel is to know this voice and to distinguish it from the deeper voice of genuine calling. The difficult voice and the calling voice can both use the same words and produce the same sensations. Learning to tell them apart is part of what the journey teaches. Now let's talk about the book's structure as a piece of storytelling, because understanding how it is built changes how you receive it. The Alchemist is structured in the way that fairy tales and myths are structured rather than in the way that realistic fiction is structured. Its logic is not psychological causation or social realism, but symbolic resonance. Events happen not because they are statistically probable in a world like ours, but because they are necessary in the symbolic order the story inhabits. The robbery happens not because Tangiers has a historically accurate crime rate, but because Santiago needs to be stripped of everything so that he can discover what remains when everything is stripped away. Fatima exists at the oasis because the love that asks you to stop is the test that appears just before the final stage of any genuine journey. The treasure is in Spain because the point of the journey was never the treasure. Reading The Alchemist as if it were realistic fiction and criticizing it when its events don't follow realistic probability is a category error. It is like criticizing Hamlet for being unrealistic about how people actually behave after their fathers die. The genre has different commitments, and those commitments are not inferior to realisms. They're just different, and they are capable of delivering different kinds of truth. The truth that symbolic narrative delivers is not the truth of how events typically unfold in the world we live in. It is the truth of what events mean when they are seen as part of a larger pattern, of what a life looks like when it is understood as a journey with a direction, rather than a sequence of days with a thread of continuity. This is an older and in some ways more fundamental form of understanding than the kind that realistic fiction delivers, and it has been the primary human tool for transmitting certain kinds of knowledge about how to live, knowledge about courage and purpose and love and loss and transformation, for as long as people have told stories. Seelho is working in this tradition consciously and deliberately. He is not trying to write a novel that could be defended before a panel of literary critics. He is trying to write a fable that will put a particular kind of understanding directly into the hands of the widest possible readership, in a form that can be received by someone who has never studied philosophy or literature or spirituality, and that will still mean something to them, and that they will feel compelled to pass on to someone they love. By that measure, the book has succeeded beyond almost any work of its generation. The question of whether it has succeeded as literature is a different question, with a more complicated answer, and it is less interesting. Let me close with something personal and direct, because I think this book asks for that kind of response. The question at the center of The Alchemist is one of the most important questions a person can ask. What did you come here to do? Not what were you trained for, not what are you good at, not what would be practical or safe or socially acceptable. What is the thing that, when you are honest with yourself in the quietest moment, feels like the real answer to that question. Most people don't ask this question very often, and most of the people who do ask it don't answer it honestly, because the honest answer is often frightening or impractical or outside the map of what people like them are supposed to want. The comfortable answer is always available and always a little smaller than the true one. The book is not telling you that your personal legend will be easy to pursue or that pursuing it will make you happy in any simple sense. Santiago is robbed. He works for 2 years in circumstances that are not his calling. He falls in love and has to leave. He is beaten in the desert. He finds his treasure where he started. None of this is easy. All of it is necessary. What the book is telling you is that the life lived in genuine pursuit of what you most deeply want, however difficult and however long the road, is more fully alive than the life lived in the settled comfort of what is safe and familiar and asks nothing of you. And that the treasure, whatever form it takes in your particular life, is not something that will arrive without effort, but something that is revealed to you and by you in the process of becoming the person who can find it. The book is asking you to take your deepest desire seriously, to stop treating it as a luxury you'll get to someday, to recognize that someday is the most dangerous word in the language of personal legends, because it is always available as a deferral and it never arrives as a date. Your caravan is forming, the desert is real, the treasure is there, and you are already in some essential way on the road.